Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone from all parts of the world who have joined for the webinar we are having today. Thank you to all of you, and hope you and your family are doing safe in the COVID times. Our best wishes are with all of you. Now, to begin with, let me introduce myself and the company to you, all of you. My name is Nitin Naveen, and I am the Vice President Innovation Strategy at AI CoreSpot. I'll be your host for the day. I have been joined by my colleague Arvind, who will also assist me in keeping the event lively and resolving technical glitches if it comes in between. So, thanks a lot to him for putting in hard work and making this one a huge success. We will try to provide a seamless experience to all of you so that you can gain maximum output out of today's session. From AI Course Spot front, let me provide a small introduction to all of you. We started last year and we are getting momentum as the time is tickling. Our aim is to be number one AI driven community all over the world so that a like minded people can be part of the same in supporting, growing, and making it a success. Our mission is to serve as a hub for information regarding Industry 4.0 technologies, which includes AI, ML, deep learning, robotics, blockchain, IoT, edge computing, analytics, 5G, drone, edge AI, digital twin, AR, VR, cloud, and so on. We'll continue to do industry backed webinars and hybrid events. The knowledge repository will be made from reliable data to industry leaders, subject matter experts, and thought leaders. We will enrich the content through videos, blogs, podcasts, newsletters, and digital content, which is there on our website as well, to shed light on the ever evolving industry. Request all of you to go through our website, that is aicorespot.io, for future updates. Also, please like our social media handles, which will keep you all updated on everything what we propose to offer in the coming months. There are lots more in store for subsequent months as well, with focus on technology in different areas like banking, financial industry, retail, e-commerce, factories, manufacturing, aviation, and so on. Request all of you to keep connected with us and enjoy the learning what we are proposed to solve this through this platform. Now about the webinar which is happening today. So today we are having a great webinar. This is a panel discussion and we'll focus on how AI is transforming the future of healthcare. Before starting with the day, I would like to highlight few things so that it can set up the tone for the amazing learning and networking day for all of you. A special mention to our technology partner, Digit7, who has helped us in understanding our vision and supporting us to create a platform like this through which we can help our objectives. Their support is immense and guidance is superb. So, some introduction about Digit7 to everyone so that all of you are aware about them. Innovation is the cornerstone for Digit7. So, at Digit7, they combine emerging technologies in different ways to engineer extraordinary products and offer INAS, which is called Innovation as a Service. They are pivoting the traditional innovation model on its head to bring innovation closer to production and citizen scale impact with innovation DNA. They draw transformative resources and endless energy from all the four quarters to make this happen. They have association with a lot of trusted brands such as AWS, Microsoft Azure, IBM, Microsoft, SAS, Adobe, Salesforce, Sterling Commerce, amongst others. Help them constantly upskill practitioners and champion the partners' best delivery methodologies. Professionally, they are also associated with a lot of great industry bodies like Tech Titans, Forbes Technology Council, CompTIA, Richardson IQ, University of Texas Dallas, and much more technology brain power to leverage their contrasting standpoints and diverse skill sets. They have a lot of great products under their kitty, which include Smart Express Store, e-commerce, Grab and Go, HPOS, admin management, Smart AR, delivery pickup app, digital wallet, drone scan, blockchain-based SCM, Label Monkey, Data Mink, and Digital Twin. The services which they offer are product engineering, innovation as a service, digital transformation, customer experiences, and innovation design. So all of you can go through their website, which is digit7.io, and understand more in depth about them. Also, thanks to all our community partners for today, which helped us create a vision for the today's webinar. It includes InfoVision, CareRev, GE Healthcare, DocGo, Healthy.io, Red Hat, WiseCare, and CSL Bearing to make this event a huge success. A special mention to speakers and attendees of the event who registered and came today to achieve their objectives through this forum. At the end of the day, if you gain few things out of this or get to network with each other and know each other, our core objectives as a platform will be achieved. Further, if anybody wants to ask question, I repeat this, if anybody wants to ask question, there's a hand button which is at the down, which they can click and come to the stage to ask questions to the speakers. There's also a menu which is on the right side of the option. There's a Q&A section. You can type in as and when the panel member speaks. We'll try to get it answered during the discussion or at the end as per the time permitted. Now, to begin the show, I'll hand it over the stage to Barbara from CareRev, who is the moderator of the panel discussion also. We have great panel members like Dharti is there, Anthony is there, Rory, Mark, Gail, Richard. So we have 7 great speakers who are there. They are the thought leaders and they will take the panel discussion forward. So over to you, Barbara, and other panel members. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitin. Hi, everybody. I'm Barb Onspach. I am the Nurse Executive and VP of Growth with CareRev. And I'm so thrilled to be here today with such a smart and talented group as I've gotten to know them in the past few weeks as we have prepared for this meeting today. Let me go around and hand it to my colleagues to go ahead and briefly introduce themselves. Let me hand this over to you, Gail.
Hi, thanks. Gail Zatz, CEO of WiseCare. We focus on value-based contracting. The U.S. and other countries is moving from fee-for-service, in which you get paid specifically for a service like breaking an arm, towards value-based contracting. By 2030, all healthcare will be moved that way, according to CMS. And so what we do is we help healthcare companies make the transition from what happens when you're being paid for a service to when you're responsible for the total care. And AI is super interesting in this space because of a couple areas. One, as other people will talk about, it really helps with the efficiency, the ability to help decision making, to speed up access to care, to support the beleaguered healthcare providers so that they can spend more time providing care and less time worried about the 80% that happens outside of their purview. It also helps with the financing. So honestly, getting paid in value contracting can be super complicated, and AI enables all of us to understand and be able to get paid so that healthcare can focus more on the care side. It also moves towards populations as opposed to individuals. And AI has so many interesting pieces that it's doing in being able to put together an entire population. It also helps with transitional of care. And so there's just so many parts that are super interesting. And I'm really excited to hear what everybody has to say.
Fantastic. Rory, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing, Barb. Thank you for having me be a part of this panel. So I'm Rory Burrill. I'm the head of health systems at Healthy.io. I have over 15 years experience in health technology and 5+ years now in working specifically around AI. And the place where I spent most of my recent career is around clinical decision support, both for the patient and the provider. And Healthy.io is a company itself that has successfully transformed the mobile device, whether that's the phone or the tablet, into a clinical grade product. And so our solutions are FDA registered and cleared. And we are really, as a company, working in the areas of AI-enabled wound measurement and management, as well as the world of urinalysis. So being able to conduct tests and do that really at the point of care, whether that's with a provider in the exam room, or whether that's with a patient in their house or in their home or wherever that care is being delivered. Personally, I'm interested in how we enhance and improve decision support, again, both for the provider and the patient. And I really see AI as augmented intelligence. This isn't artificial in any way. And this is, from my perspective, not about replacing the provider with technology, but about enabling everybody to get the best care at the best time in the most efficient way possible. So I look forward to talking about some of these ideas on the panel, and I'll pass it back to you, Barb.
Great. Mark, can you introduce yourself to everybody and tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you for having me as part of this panel. My name is Mark Mangus. I'm a principal solution architect for Red Hat, specializing in AI. And what we do, you might think Red Hat, what do they have to do with healthcare and medical services? But we actually partner with some of the largest healthcare organizations in the world to actually make their AI projects happen, right? So there's a lot of considerations that have to be taken into account, not just compliance, but cloud services and on-premise services, and where's your data, and how do you take that data and put it into action? All of those things are areas that we really get into. We roll up our sleeves and make AI accessible to the organization and actually get real work done with it. We've got a vast experience spanning many years with lots of organizations in things like clinical decision support, as well as back office revenue cycle, things like fraud detection, et cetera. So we can really speak to the practical aspect of what companies are doing with AI and what some of the challenges are. And I look forward to bringing that perspective to the panel.
Fantastic. Let's pass it to Anthony now. Tell us a little bit about your background, Anthony.
Sure, happy to, and thanks again, Barb, for having me, and Tim for putting this all together. My name is Anthony Capone. I am the President and Chief Technology Officer over at DocGo. DocGo is, I guess, unique in some regard in that we have a large part of our company which is focused on our software solutions, and the other part, which we have about 4,000 mobile medical providers throughout the company, so the country. So we're probably one of the largest mobile medical companies where we're serving the underserved populations predominantly of the United States, Medicaid populations, people on managed care plans, value-based plans like Gail had mentioned, and the homeless population, where we go out and we take our thousands of providers, nurses, EMTs, paramedics, and we treat them, as well as we transport them in all of our own ambulances. We have about hundreds and hundreds of ambulances throughout the country, and the foundation of our business, my background, my graduate degree is in computational learning theory, and the background and the foundation of our company is our technology. Massive amounts of developers, and that foundation is on artificial intelligence. So we started from day one using AI in order to handle all of our routing algorithms, our dispatch, our predictive analytics for increasing optimization while having a high confidence in our patient outcomes. And so the foundation from day one, which started about 5 years ago, was AI, was software. And from that, we've now done many, many millions and millions of patient encounters on top of that AI software system.
Fantastic. And Rich, tell us a little bit. You bring a whole other aspect of healthcare to this discussion.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Nick, for putting it together. I feel humbled to be with a bunch of really smart people working tirelessly with AI. I'm coming from the perspective of I'm the executive director of pharmacovigilance operations inside of CSL Behring. It's a plasma-derived biotherapeutics company. So we bring products to the market for rare disease primarily, and as we continue to grow, this company relies heavily on keeping patient safety at the absolute center of everything we do. In this area, and through COVID, we've heard about adverse events and adverse reactions and things like that. These things are managed with extraordinary focus on compliance, making sure that regulators around the world are satisfied that the way we're automating this core key work is done in a way that does not compromise patient safety. And so I think that's really the perspective part that I'll bring today. We're eager to automate some across the pharmaceutical space, have been able to do that now decisively, but we're in the process of adopting across the board. And so my 20 years in pharmacovigilance is now finally in a position where we can take advantage of this advanced technology, and we're looking forward to taking this journey to the next level. Thanks.
Fantastic. And just your mic's coming in and out a little bit. So if you could kind of adjust that, and we'll go to Darcy to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what your work, what your background is.
Thank you, Barbara, for coordinating these, and thank you, Nitin, for having me here. I'm looking forward to learn from different, industries, and also the way AI is leveraged in across, multiple applications in healthcare. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my experience as well as learn from some of the leaders here. Like Barbara said, we have a great talent on the panel, and glad to be here. In terms of my experience, Barbara, I have been in technology for about more than 20 years now. Nitin talked about earlier application of AI in many industries. I'm one of those who had the opportunity to work in 7 different industries before I actually started in healthcare. So I completely agree. There is one thing over a period of time, what I've learned is how data and analytics can help improve the bottom line or help business generate revenue, whether it's financial sector, whether it's insurance or online retail tech. Prior to joining GE, I worked for Groupon, which business model is very similar to Amazon. And when I joined GE, it was eye-opening how AI even can be leveraged from the data we collect from machines, right? So similar application I've seen in renewable energy. And last 3 years, I have been in healthcare, where primarily the way we are leveraging AI is how we make our machines more smarter. So these are the actual machines that are used by radiologists, the clinicians, MR, CT, X-ray, ultrasound, how we can make the workflow for clinicians efficient to improve the productivity, how we can allow them to make the decision, informed decision, with some of the insights that we can provide. So it improves the accuracy, and it helps with the interventions throughout the care continuum. So primarily focus is on building the applications and workflows for radiologists, for technicians and clinicians, applying AI to drive better outcomes and to drive productivity. We also have been heavily focusing on building the ecosystem. So clearly there are so many experts and in providing different solutions in different areas. So instead of building everything, we are also allowing for these third-party applications, the developers, to come on our platform and integrate and natively run our platform so that we can leverage all different solutions and provide 360 view to our customers so that they don't have to invest and spend time in integrating in multiple vendor solutions versus allowing for that interoperability to leverage the AI, whether it's the workflow applications or they are using it on device. So that's where, primarily last 3 I've been focusing on, and how we are using AI in this. And again, looking forward to learn from others. I'm already really excited from earlier conversations that I have been having with all of you guys. So thank you. With that, back to you, Barbara.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And I would just say, from my perspective, my work is quite frankly where the rubber meets the road. So with CareRev, it's really interesting because the work that we're doing is trying to meet the providers where they are, and to offer them flexible work, helping them to have that work-life balance in their lives without having to leave their professions. Our platform allows healthcare providers, whether it's IDNs, hospitals, subacute, non-acute spaces, access staff on an on-demand basis through transacting through our platform, really eliminating, other bottlenecks and middlemen in the process, to get those providers at the bedside in a cost-effective and efficient way for providers. So I'll go ahead and intersperse some comments about that. And Gail and I have had a lot of discussion about that, about how the intersection of AI and workforce come together. So I'll lend the workforce view throughout the discussion as we progress. But Gail, we were wanting to start off talking a little bit. I want to talk with all of you about really the impact of AI, and including the barriers to adoption. Where do you see are the areas of the most immediate impact?
Sorry, I'm having technical trouble, which is a pretty good lead-in for the fact that there are areas that technology does really well and better, which AI helps tremendously on. And there's areas, particularly in healthcare, where you need people. And so the idea with AI is how do we use it to, in my opinion, to enable providers to do more of the care that only they can do. And so it helps with, there is so much data in healthcare, like an unbelievable amount of data. Our problem is not lack of data, it's the lack of how do we use the data. And what AI does is tremendously with decision making. So you can go from from spending days with a patient on a bed and being able to get the information, help make the decisions, and care for them and get them out. The transitions, I know we're going to talk about the fact that at least 80% of care happens outside of clinic. How do you get people the resources that they need? How do you help get them the care that they need if they're home? I'm in value-based contracting, which is the shift from sort of how we pay for and deliver from an individual to a population, and where AI can help in every single aspect. So on the financial pieces, for example, on quality measures in order to get paid, there are hundreds of different measures that will track against millions of different data points. AI enables that to be streamlined so that people can get paid to do the services that they need to do. On the far other side is that how do you manage a complex population? What we do really well, what providers do really well, is provide direct care. And so the AI will enable all of the information that has to happen for that care to occur. And so the impact is both on the business side, which is interesting to me, because I do believe that if we can't figure out how to pay for it, we can no longer be in healthcare. And also on the business side, being able to support organizations that support providers. And then also directly on the opposite side, on the care side, with transitions, with referral management. I mean, on cost and quality of care, the quality of referrals is an enormous impact. And AI can streamline that directly so that the patient gets the best care at the most applicable cost and the best experience with the least amount of interruption. So it's really a tremendous support to both the providers, health systems, and directly to patients and caregivers. So I'm really excited to, and I hope I'm going to make all of this. I'm kind of seem to be draining battery on a bunch of devices, but thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. And let me pass it to Rory. So Rory, Healthy IO, you're a global leader in point of care, enabled, a software with solutions you're used by both patients and providers. So what types of impacts are you seeing right now with providers and with patients?
Yeah, so I'm gonna build off of what Gail said, and actually I'm gonna build a little bit off of something that Mark brought up when we were doing some of the initial planning discussions for the call. And Mark brought up this really important point that that there's really this continuum of healthcare. And it's really interesting to see where AI fits into every step of this process. And even on the panel here, we've got, Richard from a research R&D perspective, where AI is speeding the process of developing therapeutics, right? Being able to crunch data that not even a group of humans could be able to synthesize and make sense of. To education, to the actual point of care delivery, to managing and tracking patients, and then all the way back to what Gail's talking about, from sort of the accountable care payment part of the process, right? So it's weaving its way into the entire continuum of care. And from our perspective at Healthy, we live at the middle point of that whole process. And this is where decisions are being made and where care is actually happening. And that can be for the patients or for the providers. And from my perspective and from our company perspective, this is where we can have tremendous impact really in two main areas. First, to Gail's point, there's no shortage of data. But what is really important is being able to help the human, the provider, in the moment, be able to synthesize what they're looking at to be able to make a better decision. And so we do this, and I'll give you a very specific example from Healthy IO's perspective. We do this in the world of measuring and tracking and managing wounds, right? So historically, a wound care provider would use a paper tape measure, and they would capture all this data. And you might have an RN doing this all the way up to, a registered nurse or an NP or PA specially trained in wound care, all the way up to physicians, kind of all over the spectrum here. But in that process, when you're using a paper tape measure, there is just inherent in there's an amount of error, because it's a very sort of manual process, and you're sort of doing a lot of estimation. Where AI can fit into that process is you can bring the technology to literally scan the wound and let the computer help that process, help the provider, not replace what the provider's doing, but augment that process and drive that error rate down from a 40 or 50% error rate when you're using literally a paper tape measure, down to less than 3% error rate when you're using technology to scan and to calculate this information. And then it goes beyond that. With AI, you're able then to also use the sensor, use the data, use vision science to look at the wound, and then actually create sort of a map of the tissue makeup. And that's something where, unless you've had years and years and years of wound training, you don't have that expertise to be able to properly identify all the tissue type. But with this enhanced augmented process and the machine learning that's gone into looking at all of these different examples of tissue type, we're able to enable anyone in the moment to do that scan and have sort of that help, that assistance in calculating what the tissue makeup is. And that's critical for the healing process associated with wound care. So from an impact perspective, we are seeing this happen right now. And it's really happening in this moment of helping the providers make sense of all the data that's out there, and to be able to sort of augment them in that process of getting to clinical accuracy or to better care. On the other side of this is really the enabling, even to the patient level, the ability for them to start to do some of these tasks that they might have had to wait to do with a provider, and have to wait for months to get into the provider office. Now we can deliver apps right to the patient, so the patient can even start to perform these tasks. And this is another space in which Healthy operates, where a patient can now actually go and do urinalysis, a lab test, looking at kidney function in their house. They can collect the sample, they can do the dipstick, they can then take their camera on their iPhone or their Android device and take a picture of that result, and get a really accurate read of kidney function. And this is something that the patient may have had to wait to get to a doctor's office, or if they're, Anthony, to your point, if it's in an underserved community, they may not even be able to get to that lab test or get to the provider. And now this technology can literally be delivered right to their house, so they can do this test in the comfort of their own home and get a result immediately. Don't have to wait 3 days for a lab value. And then all this data can be moved to the provider to start to deliver care and respond to that information in the moment. So So from an impact perspective, we're seeing it now. It's happening in many, many different ways. I think, and one of the things we'll talk about a little bit later on in this discussion then is making sure that we spend time to make sure that this data is accurate, that it is validated. And another really critical point that I all want to talk about, and I think we all will want to talk about, is the concept of equity, making sure that all of these models are based on equitable data sets so that the algorithms, the calculations, are representative for the entire population. So we'll get back to this and come back to that. That'll be an interesting part of the discussion is understanding how it improves equity and how we really have to think about equity when we're really training the models and these processes.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating call out. And I guess I would say, I think a natural progression might be, Anthony, for actually you to weigh in next. DocGo's focus on mobile health care and underserved populations. Where are you seeing the biggest impact? Because I think you could probably build a lot off of what Rory was just talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great things about Healthy IOs, they're the digital reading of a physical situation is on the error rate that Rory mentioned, but it's on the QA side as well. So normally how most medicine works is that you have someone, a clinician, who will make an assessment, and then they'll document that assessment, and that transformation is their assessment of a reading. It is not taking the reading and putting it into the chart. That's generally speaking how most medicine works. So a perfect example is like an EKG. Oftentimes when you have somebody who's like an emergency situation, you'll have the provider's interpretation of the EKG listed into the patient's chart, not the actual EKG itself will be transmitted in there. So one of the things I think that's really very impactful with what Rory's solution is that you could take exactly what that reading is of all of the measurements that you have of a wound and put that into the patient's chart, so that you have the ability for usually the receiving clinician, the primary care provider for that patient, who can then go and interpret that. Doesn't necessarily mean that the provider who was on site made the wrong decision, but in healthcare, QA is such a critical component. And being able to go back and see the raw data yourself as a provider, as a physician, is really, really critical when you have to make specific decisions. Like, let's say, as an example, that patient that you're doing the wound care for becomes septic, or they start to have their care starts to decompensate, and you want to go back and understand, well, was the wound actually treated properly? Well, if you're just looking at a text readout of somebody's provider who did the wound care there, it's going to be already skewed to their bias of them doing the correct care. Whereas if you have the exact measurements that came from a digital solution, now you can say, hey, the actual care being provided during that situation, that encounter, what was not correct. And that's actually what created a much higher likelihood of this decompensation happening. So I think that in all cases, when you have a reading, a diagnostic happening, being able to capture the raw data into the patient's chart for further evaluation later is a really critical component to ensuring that you have better patient outcomes.
Absolutely. And, it's Mark, you've been an expert in health information technology and technology adoption pretty much throughout your career. What are you seeing in terms of adoption across the healthcare continuum? Because I know you look at many different facets of healthcare. You're on mute.
I knew that was going to happen at some point. Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, what I'm seeing is interesting, is a transition from kind of the early adopter phase of AI in really only the largest organizations could afford to consider, implementing anything with AI. Right now, we're past that, and it's kind of getting to more of a service grade where you can kind of consume it as a service from the major cloud providers. It's easy to get, in other words, and kind of low impact to adopt. So what I'm seeing is lots of little projects kind of peppered across these large organizations, where they'll take something that's what they consider low hanging fruit, in terms of where they'll get a big ROI quickly, to take to take a problem on board. I'll use a revenue side example, which is something like claims fraud detection, right? So there are a lot of patterns that you can pick up that would indicate fraud that a human couldn't necessarily see, but it's easy for a machine to see the pattern, right? So just making a change of 1% to 2% in the amount of fraud that they can catch with an AI algorithm, more than pays for a project like that. But what I'm certainly more interested in, even though those are very important, to Gail's point, you got to get paid to keep everything going. So we see payers, especially insurance companies, focused on use cases like that. But what I'm very interested in are things that actually affect the patient outcomes directly. And when you look at the care continuum and the ecosystem of payers and providers that are necessary to do lots of coordination to deliver care in the American healthcare system, AI becomes very poignant in terms of how it can help the care coordination along that continuum. And what I mean specifically by that is what my fellow panelists have talked about already during the discussion is, all the different types of data, the amount of data, it's overwhelming. So in terms of just basic interoperability, sharing data amongst the ecosystem, AI can kind of come in as a coordinator, as a navigator, to help move that data from point to point along the continuum. And beyond that, once you have the data, the question is, how do I derive knowledge from that data, and how do I put that knowledge into action? And that's the work that we do a lot at Red Hat, is to try to help companies meet them wherever they are in their journey of technology adoption, with whatever specialized things that they've already invested in, and kind of glue it together. What we pride ourselves on being the multi-cloud or hybrid cloud company. Well, if you're an Amazon customer, a Google customer, it doesn't matter to us. We'll take whatever you have and really partner with you on your 3 to 5 year journey of reimagining health, which everybody seems to be on right now, to get where you need to go and to really move the needle on patient outcomes, which I think we're all kind of focused on that. But what I pride myself on, and being part of the team at Red Hat, is getting that real work done, and especially the last mile, the part that touches the patient, really affecting that journey and really affecting the outcomes for those.
Well, that just makes your work even more rewarding, knowing that there's a patient on the other end of what you're doing. And Darty, you've been working toward driving digital transformation in healthcare for the last few years. It would be great, Darty, if you could share your experience of where you've seen the impact in applying AI.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll put it in two perspectives, right? I want to first start with how we are leveraging AI that directly impacts, patients as patients use these different applications, and we directly work with the providers, right? So let me give a little bit of insight on the patient engagement application and how we are leveraging AI in that. I think all of us at one point in time have had experience where when we go to hospital for typical scanning, whether it's a CT, MR, either we are waiting even though we have an appointment, or at times, because of, whatever the personal circumstances, we actually had to reschedule or cancel. There are multiple implications, on patient side when they are at the location and they are still waiting regardless of the appointment. And on the provider side, when there are no shows, that leads to inefficiencies and lack of utilization of the existing technicians and the radiologists that they have part of their workforce. And again, this is going back to Gail's original comment, and Barbara, to your point, workforce optimization in this world where everything is becoming mostly on demand. It's really critical for provider to understand what to expect given the history and what some of the trends that they have seen in the past. So our focus is to, one, give that 360 view of a patient, which is, we call it patient jacket, is the information about that patient to the provider. But at the same time, as we have that patient jacket, which is the data collected from multiple areas, it's their health record, it's the history, in terms of different diagnostics that they had from clinics, the general physician, all of that together with, some of the trends we have seen in terms of their past experiences on exams and the schedules and the days of the week. We build the smart scheduling algorithm, which is embedded in that application. So at point in time, it gives the protection to providers to help them understand if there will be a no-show and what is the potential risk on the no-shows, so that helps them kind of optimize. In cases where there are cancellations and there is availability on the waiting, then it provides the provider an ability to proactively reach out to those patients that potentially would want to come in. And that directly drives the optimization and productivity for the providers, and it gives the better experience for the patient. So that's the one application on how we are leveraging AI directly, impacting the providers as well as the patient. Another example that I would like to give is around some of the fleet applications that we have. So a lot of times, whether it's a CT, MR, X-ray machines, there are certain protocols that needs to be set on those devices, depending on the type of scan that's been, provided by the general physician. Every patient has their specific guideline in terms of what protocol, what kind of dose that they are supposed to be given their history and their tolerance. We have embedded AI in how we are establishing the auto protocol system, where given the similar patient, their history on the different modalities between CT, MR, X-ray, how we can standardize, create the library, and remotely be able to set the standards given the history and the same cohort of the patient. This not only reduces the work, of course, of the technician to be able to set these standards on site, but it also improves the accuracy and limits the scan time for the patient, because you are able to do this automatically, remotely, and it's available across different modalities in the hospital. So this is another area where we have embedded AI. And then specifically, the device, the application of AI on device is where we have leveraged deep learning. This is where we apply reconstruction, algorithm to improve the image sharpness, to enable shortened scan time that provides that quality of the image to reduce the noise, and it enables the radiologist, as the scan is done, it gives them the ability to provide the standard reporting in a faster way. So both, it's the scan time improvement that helps the patient, you get in and you get out. And at the same time, radiologists, because they have better quality of the image and there is a lot of work that's done up front, it reduces the time for them to provide the diagnosis. So I think all in all, this is a win-win situation. Another example on X-ray machine where we have provided the ability to diagnose and provide the indicator if a patient comes in and if they have potential for pneumothorax. Now, this is on-site as available on scanner. It definitely impacts the productivity and also the accuracy for the radiologists as they are working through the diagnosis. But we also made this available to be embedded in the workflow. What that means is that when all the images are scanned, it gets stored in the archiving system, where the radiologist workflow is prioritized based on what some of the attention is required. So if a patient is diagnosed potentially for, in this situation, pneumothorax, then that particular record will be prioritized first for that radiologist to take the attention so that they can provide that report to general physician and, the intervention in terms of the the next step to what kind of therapy that patient should get, right? So these are type of the applications that we have been leveraging AI, where it could be used on device, it could be used on the workflows, or the fleet level application across multiple modalities, or it could be leveraged by an applications for different persona in the hospital. Back to you, Barbara.
Wonderful. Well, that really gives us a good, pretty circumspect idea of how AI is impacting healthcare. And Rich, I know that you're working toward automation, in healthcare for years. And progress has been difficult at sometimes, but that there's some light at the end of the tunnel with that. So let's hear from you about what all this means at a very pragmatic level.
Sure. I think it's something that Mark was saying, where you think about points and also Rory, where some of the research is absolutely leveraging AI in place right now. I'm on this other end of the spectrum. On some level, people talk about it as the crown jewels. So every pharma company has a center of its priority, the patient safety first. First, no harm. And their systems have been built around pharmacovigilance, adverse event reporting, so they satisfy the regulations to the letter of the law. FDA, the Europeans, Japanese, Chinese, everyone's got the same tension with their regulatory set. We have to satisfy. And as such, large databases have been established and have come to be known as a solid foundation with which you can have confidence that you're going to be able to satisfy those regulations and keep your patient's safety first. Along the way, we've got this expectation that we cost as low as possible. There's been pressure on this area for years. Some of you will know work shifted to India, shifted to China, shifted to Eastern Europe. That's one way you can drop cost. The other is you can automate. And you'll start to see now big pharma. Some of the big pharma companies have actually stepped out there in partnership with the regulators to bring this artificial intelligence, robotics, process automation into mainstream. I'm a mid-sized pharma, and so we have this challenge of what's the cost-benefit analysis, and at what point does either the AI capability become low enough so that I can step into it, knowing that there's confidence to the regulatory phase. We're not making a mistake, because no pharma company can afford to make a mistake here. And there's another concept that I think Anthony probably mentioned, which is around medical judgment. And there's an aspect of patient safety that does call on that. Some say that AI can consume that space. Many argue that still is the absolute center of the world of what pharma companies need to have. They know their products better than anyone else in the world. They understand the clinical space in which they're delivered, and they need to be on top of that and understand, assimilate, consume that data, and take the right insight of it almost immediately. There's a time dimension to this as well. And if that's the context in which we're operating, in a way, it's a technical problem. We will move the entire industry into this space the moment that the cost benefit drops sufficiently so that the investment for the mid, small size farmers can step there with confidence. And so we're on that pathway right now. Barb, I think you mentioned you want to talk about workforce a little bit. I could tell you about what we're doing, and I think it would translate many others across the industry. We start bringing in people to explore pilots, call them, with robotics process automation, with natural language processing, to begin to develop digital literacy for a technically expert group of people. And that's hard. That's a shift. People are worried their jobs are going away. And at the same time, we need to have these competencies within our very niche parts of R&D so we can move with confidence. So it's a really exciting time.
Yeah.
We're partnership across pharma companies is greater than I've ever seen it, largely driven, I think, by COVID. And so that gives us an opportunity to understand who is having success and how confidently can we move up this automation journey as I see it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rich. We're still losing your audio a little bit here and there, so I don't know if there's anything you can do for that, but I heard 95% of that.
I'll come back.
That's okay. I know that Anthony wanted to weigh in on basically that creating predictive analytics based on PIH and claims data. Anthony, do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's one of the key components. I think it will end up becoming the biggest differentiator when it comes to healthcare in the future. It's something that we're doing today at DocGo, but I think the future of it is very, very exciting. What does that mean? It means that by having as much data about the patient's current situation and their past medical history, having the ability to understand what care needs to be provided, sometimes in the moment for acute episodic, as well as continual care for chronic care management. So in both circumstances, being able to know whether you're talking about things that are quite long-term, say like genetic testing to understand that somebody has like a BRCA gene and what the treatment protocols are and preventative measures are relative to that. So being able to build treatment plans at a kind of strategic long-term plan for a patient, but then in the short term. So like one of the things that we do pretty heavily is we use RPM, remote patient monitoring devices. So an RPM device, you have the ability to take and tell vitals of an individual in real time. So some of the ones that we have are ones that are synthetic wearables. So you have one that's like a shirt, almost like an Under Armour shirt, and underwear, and that's being able to basically give you a 12 lead in real time, as well as your vitals, as well as your posture, whether you have fallen, heart rate, glucose, and all of that. It has the ability to detect in real time. When you combine all that data over a long enough period of time, you start to really be able to see trends. You can have predictive analytics to know whether or not somebody's going to be going and having a heart attack long before they do, or somebody is at high risk of having a stroke. You might know by looking at all that data, as an example, just in real time right now, that with enough vital information over a 24-hour period, you can have a much greater likelihood of predicting that somebody has COVID right now than a PCR test, right? Most people don't do that because they don't want to wear a device all the time. But that's a really key component, is monitoring an individual's data relative to their current situation, all of their vital information, their interactions, making sure that they have all their regular blood workup. Taking all of that in can allow us from AI to look at heuristic information across millions of other patients to say, okay, here's a very likely outcome for that patient. Here's a treatment protocol that can give them the best patient outcome, and here's how I can intervene in a patient's life cycle to avoid acute care because I'm providing a preventative measure. That, I think, is going to become the mainstay of healthcare, and it's all going to be about interoperability and access of information, and then obviously computing that information.
I think that kind of information will really feed into how we look at workforce and staffing, and as we go forward in the future, as we know more real time what patient needs are and the change of acuity for those patients, it will be really important for us to be able to have on-demand systems, on-demand platforms, and be able to flex care and bring care to where we need it and meet the patient where they are. I'd like to transition over to the more complex side of all of this, the governance, the risk, the compliance, the necessary evils. I wanted to hand that over to Gail. Gail, you've done a tremendous amount of work in this area. Share with us what you're seeing. I can't hear you. Oh.
Gail, you're on mute.
Gail, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now?
Yes.
Okay. I love all the examples everybody's giving, and really because and so I'll give a few in this field to show sort of like the different sides. On the business side, in the U.S., what just went into effect January 1 is called the No Surprises Act. And the No Surprises Act requires various parts of healthcare. It basically affects about 200 million beneficiaries, patients, January 1, to provide notice ahead of time and get HIPAA compliant consent that they will be willing to pay for out-of-network charges. Now, without getting into sort of how complicated this is, I want to tie it into, because AI is going to be the solution. You have massive, complex systems, which is healthcare, which do not connect and may have many don't even know their prices. And now they're required legally or pinged very dramatically to provide a patient 3 days ahead of time what is it going to cost for a lab that might be run out of network. So you're talking about millions and millions of data points that then have to ping between 3 different organizations, from provider to payer, which is the insurance company, to the beneficiary, the patient, who has to sign it in a HIPAA compliant way. Then it has to go back to every single possible provider that may be involved in that event, who has to be able to prove that they received this. It is super complicated process in health systems that have never had any of the pieces of it. So come in, and I am positive that the solution is going to be from an AI-driven company, that the AI can take all of these different complicated data points where you have providers who don't know the prices, who don't know if you're in network or out of network, who don't know whether or not who's going to provide the care. AI can step in and take all of these different systems, even if the different players are not interoperable with each other, and make it work effectively, seamlessly for the patient, which is very important to everyone, because right now payers are facing a 20% pay cut as of 2 weeks ago, and they don't even know it. Patients, without signing the right consent, could not get care. So this is really important. I know it seems like a little boring, but nobody's going to get care, and we're not going to have providers if this doesn't occur, and it's going to have to occur from AI. Totally different area, risk stratification. We've been touching on sort of like what happens in making decisions, particularly at home. You have people who are on long-term chronic care or have an episode or an event. How do you decide when to intervene? Like, this is a really important question. We know that if you get somebody their diabetes medicine, they cannot end up in an acute situation. Sepsis from wound care is 50% of preventable readmissions to post-acute facilities. That is incredibly expensive, right? But how do you know? We don't even know, most people do not know, when a patient goes into a hospital or gets discharged from the hospital. So how do you intervene during those essential 72 hours? Essential, if you don't even know about it, because without AI, the systems could take 5 days, 10 days. It's too late to do anything. AI enables us to look at a patient and say, you know what? We have all of the data points that we've put into the system that tell us that this patient's in danger, and tells us that if we intervene and send somebody to the house, it doesn't matter how we pay for it, then we're going to be able to do something. I think I'm dying pretty soon. The other is equity. I'm so excited to talk about equity. It's super important in value-based contracting. If you look at the move in healthcare, the health equity is a major impetus. So fee-for-service says if you break an arm, you get paid for the service. Value-based contracting says fix the sidewalk. Equity says fix the sidewalk for everyone. It's very complicated. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it on my computer, so I'm going to hand it off to all of you and just say that, like, these are examples of where we're going to make an enormous impact. I'm going to try going on and off again. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Gail. And Mark, I know that you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, Gail mentioned one of the use cases that we've published with one of our customers, which is sepsis detection. So I'll use that as an example of navigating this complex care continuum I was talking about before, in terms of not just making an impact on outcomes, but on compliance as well. So one of our customers, HCA, pretty big organization, they had a problem with detecting sepsis early enough, which a lot of providers do, right? It's a big problem with most, especially urgent care situations. And they had the further complexity of having 160 hospitals and over 900 data sources to get data from. And so we partnered with them to provide the enabling technology to allow them to do real-time data collection from bedside monitoring devices, as well as the back office stuff, looking at claims data, looking at patterns, so that they could bring all this stuff together, use AI to actually inference the data to look for patterns that would indicate sepsis. Skipping to the end, what we actually got to with them after several months was a solution that was able to detect sepsis up to 12 hours earlier than the best providers, best clinicians could do on their own, right?
Wow.
And so this is about 2 years ago, and the last I checked in a few months ago, they were up to about 20,000 lives saved by using AI to detect sepsis, right? So you might say, well, that's really great. That's a high impact situation. But what about patient privacy? What about, how do we protect the data as it goes through the care continuum? How does AI factor into that? Well, one of the things that you have to look at is all of the actors or personas that are involved in protecting that data. There's a lot of human interaction that goes into a compliance scenario, right? And what that looks like usually is attestation. Somebody has to look at the data and say, yes, no, that's protected data, needs to stay protected, or no, it's not. Or it's a process where they have to say, yes, I checked this, right? It's just a human doing that. Well, as the care continuum gets increasingly complex, the amount of data increases, the types of data, become more varied. It becomes less and less valuable to handle compliance that way, right? Because it's just too much. It's not only too much for a human, but the value of a human getting involved in something like that decreases, right? So one of the things that we really help our customers to do is look at ways to use AI and automation technologies to completely automate the compliance process. So you can think of it in terms of like setting up a model. This is what the compliance should look like for this data flow. Does this data flow match that model? Yes or no? If the answer is no, then the automation tools can step in and make it match or shut it down without human interaction, right? So then the humans just have to get involved for exception management, right? What happened? It shut it down because it wasn't compliant and it couldn't make it compliant. So now I need to get involved and figure out what happened. So doing it that way increases the throughput, if you will, of any kind of compliance operation by thousands of times, right? Because you're taking that human evaluation out of it. Now, obviously, you have to get the modeling right. You have to get the process right, and it involves a lot of testing. But this is the stuff that we do with customers every day. And I can tell you that it's made a huge, huge impact on a lot of organizations to treat compliance this way.
Darty, I think that you wanted to jump in at this point and add a few comments yourself.
Yeah, I actually saw a question, and I think it's very related in terms of the governance and risk. The question is how AI can protect patient privacy. And I think in my perspective, AI is one of the best in a way to support that. Ultimate goal, for patient and provider is how quickly and accurately as a patient I get the diagnosis. And for provider, the ultimate goal is without, having errors, how efficiently I can provide patient, the outcomes. In all, I think both sides, the goal, the way AI supports is understanding that patients' health records, so it's coming through EMRs, EHRs, the previous scans, the images that you get, or the vitals. Now majority of us, have the wearables through which you collect the vitals, or the previous lab results that you have. All these data, right, or genomics data. Once you collect, you can de-identify the patient, which is, allows you that privacy, and it could create a jacket. So the cohort of patients with the similar metrics in terms of their age, their condition, the previous diagnostic, based on the lab results, based on the scan, and it allows the AI to take that into consideration, how it trains the model and how it identifies and predicts in terms of any new patient coming in the future with the similar conditions, what some of the diagnostics that you could provide. So in a way, it serves the purpose for both. Where patient is looking for the better outcome and provider wants to provide, accurate outcome with, efficiency as quickly as possible. But in this case, AI is not looking at the individual person record. It looks at the cohort. It's de-identified, the name, the social security. You don't know which person had that condition, belongs in that particular cohort. But with AI, it's able to put that patient in that bucket, and it's able to predict and give the early diagnosis to make sure that we can intervene and provide the right, therapy or the service for the patient, right? So all in all, I think AI is one of the best way where we can protect the patient's, privacy, but at the same time, give the outcome that's a win-win situation for both the provider and the patient.
I think we had another question here as well about the cybersecurity additionally. Who'd like to tackle that one? The question was, what are the cybersecurity challenges when we use AI in healthcare? Would anybody like to give a kind of concise weigh in on that?
I'm sure that everybody has a lot of comments because coming from various different angles, whether that be, when you're trying to interop with, say, with a hospital system, or you have a physical device and you're transmitting the data. I think that in general, though, the cybersecurity challenges that you have just are, what is accessible and what is not accessible. So I think that there's the standard cybersecurity challenges that you normally have, which is like in a health system. I think that we work with something like many, I don't even know the number, many large health systems. And I can't tell you how many of them have been totally locked down because they got some sort of ransomware in the past 5 years. It totally just locked, and they were going back to paper for a day or 2 days. And that's a very, very significant reality of just living, I think, in the current digital age, where people will create ransom in order to get access to data for you to be able to get access to your data. Honestly, though, I believe that the larger cybersecurity risk when it comes to at least the exposure of patient information is just about how accessible it is. I don't think it's really about, can I do some sort of brute force attack, or can I do some sort of injection, or can I really hack into a system? Those exist. But right now, there are many data exchanges for patient information that are simply based on your they're your faith-based. They're based on, I'm a good actor in the organization in order to access that patient's data, and that I have reason to access that patient's data. And I think that's because it's not actually built by computer scientists. I think if a computer scientist built a system by which you want to do data interchange, you would actually have an algorithmic design for trust. Trust is a concept in computer science. And so you would actually build trust based on a association of trust and a tracking of continually upholding that trust. That's generally speaking how these kind of chains work. And that I feel is the bigger exposure when it comes to practical realities of you as a patient having your data exposed to everyone on the internet, and then that being used against you for whatever malicious purpose it might be. Is just exposure. But I'm sure that the individuals on our panelists who have physical devices or who interop with large EMRs on the health system side, they all have lots of comments on the challenges they face with cybersecurity.
Yeah. Well, this has been fascinating talking. There's so much more we could say about compliance, and maybe we need to come back together just to do an hour and a half on governance, risk, and compliance. And I know that our time is running shorter. I think we've got about 15 minutes left. So didn't want to neglect getting to the future state, because I know all of you are very forward thinking in your roles within your companies. And I'd like to hear you weigh in on that. Mark, how do you see the future of AI unfolding for us in healthcare?
Thanks, Barbara. I think AI is really going to move from kind of a behind the scenes or kind of built into the fabric of whatever technology stack you have running in your company into an active member of the care team. And what I mean by that is it's always going to be in an augmentation role to help clinicians make decisions, make better decisions, right? But it's still not accepted as an active member of a patient's care team. And I think that's what's going to change. Because when you think about what AI does well and what it doesn't do well, what it does well is take in lots and lots of data, much more than a human can, and process it against a known set of conditions. What AI doesn't do well is handle unknowns, right? It has to know how to respond based on conditions that it's been programmed for, and it does that very, very well. So when you talk about things like disease conditions, we can put in all we know about how diseases are contracted, how they're treated, what all the complicating factors are, and an AI could go through that very quickly and weigh in with the clinician and say, here's what I think about the patient's condition. And it's already doing that. But what I'm saying is it's going to be more of a frontline thing, and it's going to be more accepted by clinicians and patients that's happening. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the clinician to implement a care plan, and it's going to be up to a patient to accept. That's the course of care. But I think AI is going to go from kind of a background actor into a frontline actor, and it's going to be a lot more accepted. And the other area I think is really where it can help is when we get into these transitions of care between different providers, and where the information needs to flow between different entities like payer organizations. AI is going to be, again, much more visible, much more upfront in kind of establishing what the ground rules are for information sharing, and allowing. I'm trying to make this so that it's not a technical thing, but essentially what the AI is going to be doing is telling each person in that chain of information sharing what the rules are for sharing that information.
Right.
And you can actually interrogate the AI and ask it, what can I do, and how can I share, and how can I keep information private? And it will actually respond and tell you what you need to do interactively rather than just failing. So that's going to be a huge help, and that's coming in the next few years.
Let me move to Rory, and thank you for that, Mark. Rory, I know you wanted to weigh in a little bit on the governance, risk, and compliance. Can you go ahead and do that, and then transition to your comments about future state?
Yeah, I'll build on Anthony's statement here. Again, all of this AI technology is so easily accessible. Really, anybody can get access to the ability to create an algorithm, and there are data sets out there that are available. So there's a really important aspect to this of working with partners that not only sort of have the deep understanding and respect for how to build good data, but I think there's going to be even more focus on making sure that these companies have the right procedures in place to protect information and to treat that information appropriately. I know in the world that we work in, we have access to images. Again, we're scanning and creating sort of a video scan, a 3D model of patient information, and we treat that incredibly with incredible respect to make sure that we're protecting that information. We're HIPAA compliant. We've been through the high trust certification process. So I think anyone who's looking at these potential partners need to not only look at how good they are technically, but also need to look at how good these partners are procedurally, that they've invested in the time to secure the information. So that's sort of my thoughts from a risk or compliance standpoint. In terms of future state, first off, my dream AI algorithm would be for all of these video conferencing services to recognize that mouths are moving and to immediately go to unmute. So I think at the point when somebody can figure out how to automatically unmute, that will be a giant leap forward in vision science. But in all seriousness, kind of going back, Mark, to what you were talking about and building on your example from HCA and the sepsis detection, it links to what Anthony was talking about with effectively analyzing all the data that was available in the patient evaluation. It links to what Gail was talking about in terms of all of the information that the providers have to have access to, even beyond patient care, like understanding formulary coverage, et cetera. There was research done, there was a project done at Yale New Haven where they were looking at enabling the nursing process in the ED with an AI algorithm to identify highly at-risk patients. And they put the process in place, and interestingly enough, it worked. It worked very well. To Mark's example with sepsis, it helped to flag these at-risk patients. It was looking not only at the exams, the physical examination the nurse was doing, but it was looking at all the data available in the patient records, sort of patient history, comorbidities and medications. And the algorithm works swimmingly. But what really was interesting to me about that research at Yale New Haven was the byproduct of all of that was they published these 4 points about what is really going to help to make sure that AI becomes adopted and that an AI project becomes a true success. And the 4 points that they came up with is, first and foremost, within the organization, you have to have a growth mindset towards enhancement and towards innovation. And if you don't have that growth mindset in your organization, the health system or the hospital, you're going to hit barriers right from the start. Secondly, they said that the tool experience had to be local and it had to be integrated into their existing processes and practices. You can't just drop something in from 40,000 feet and expect it to be adopted and actually work. It has to sort of be built with the people there and who are the knowledge experts on site. The third point is the tools have to be easy to use. It has to be straightforward. It has to work in the flow. Again, going back to Mark, sort of just being able to talk to the AI to be able to get that information. And the last thing I think is probably the most critical in terms of thinking to the future state and how all of this will be adopted is ultimately the tools have to benefit patient care, right? Even if it's dealing with the funding or the financing or the research, it's got to get back to patient care. And it's got to allow the providers more time at the bedside, or it's got to let the patients get access to better care. So I love those 4 points sort of coming out of that research, which wasn't even about the algorithm. It was about how do we make it so we can really start to adopt this technology.
So it looks like we have a little more time than I thought we had. So Rich, I wanted to ask you, and hopefully your audio will connect well. Give us your thoughts on the regulatory compliance side, and then maybe you can dovetail that into what you think the future of mid-sized pharma is going to look like.
Barb, can you hear me okay now? Or no?
We'll let you know if it breaks up.
Waving your arm. That'll be my artificial intelligence. Okay. And I think I covered some of the compliance stuff earlier. That's a big challenge for us. How do we have confidence? Right now, one of the large pharmas have gone publicly to talk about the success they're having in partnership with MHRA, our most challenging regulator from the UK. And as all cheering them on for success, we're watching carefully to see if that bears the fruit we expect it to. The observation that's been made is so far so good. If you make a mistake with this, if the algorithms wrong, the scale is significant and the implications are extraordinary. So we have to watch that very carefully. How is it now, Barbara?
Yeah.
Still here?
You're kind of breaking up, and if it's okay with you, well, you might take a look at that. I'm going to go ahead and move it along
Sure.
and ask Darty, in your experience, what role do you see AI playing in the future? What impacts do you see it driving within healthcare for patients and providers?
Yeah, I think, look, I will say that shared economy and shared platform, right? We have seen the trend with Uber, coming up with the platform and completely disrupted that market. With pandemic, the way patient, provider, and payer in health industry, how used to they operate has changed, right? It completely opened up new potential for all three sides in terms of how we engage and how we used to operate and how we saw some of the ways we used to get treatment. Telehealth has become prominent. I never knew my mother would actually do a televisit with the doctor, right, where she would talk to the doctor over a smartphone. But honestly, I never knew she would be able to use a smartphone, right? So the technology has evolved, even the generation on how they interact and how they expect certain way of they are getting the service. So to me, the future trend in terms of how AI is going to be able to drive the disruption, which is actually enabled by the pandemic in how all three persona in healthcare industry is interacting. So bringing it together, allowing that interoperability, allowing the visibility as a patient for me to be able to get that outcome, at the tip of my hand, and having that shared platform, shared service where anywhere I am able to identify who is in my network and who I can get for that service that I need at a point in time, because we are all in very much of a on demand. And as a patient, me getting a proactive information before I even know that I need to get. I think that's the level of AI sophistication. If we bring it, where all three, the payer, provider, and patient come together and bring that one holistic view, keeping the patient and population health in mind, I think that would be the next disruption where AI can add tremendous value in the future.
Gail, I know you wanted to weigh in next, and I think you also had some comments back on our last topic around compliance that you wanted to share as well.
Well, I think they tie in, right? Just taking a step backwards in terms of what AI really is, it enables computers and computer systems to take massive amounts of data, filter it, make decisions much faster than humans can ever do, right? So when we're talking about compliance, the problem is that we're talking about millions of different data features. So most providers and health systems don't even know what it means to be compliant on any given factor. They don't know. And then, so you'll have 100 different general categories of quality that you're being measured on. You have to do something different for every possible contract that you're in. Every provider could have 20, 30, 40 different contracts based on their patients. Each one of those contracts can have hundreds of different general quality areas that has millions of different points that go back, and it's happening in real time. The legislation changes, and suddenly all of the factors that mean that you're being compliant have changed in 48 hours, right? So what AI does and what it will do is it takes all of that and does what a human cannot do, and says, okay, we have these many different factors. We're going to put it in so that it makes sense, so that people know what the right thing to do is, right? And so And that's just a piece of, particularly like on the business side of healthcare, we see more and more and more compliance because you have more and more regulations that say what you have to do not only to get paid, but in order to function in healthcare. And so we're going to see even more of that. The other is sort of like, where is healthcare going, and how does that tie into the fact that AI is absolutely going to become a standard? I mean, remember when there were not computers in offices? It was not that long ago. It was in most of our careers, right? So we're going to see where it does more and more as it moves. So where is healthcare going? Healthcare, we know it's going towards health equity, which says that we're providing care to everybody and giving everybody access. How do you do that when 50% of electronic health records are inaccurate on race or gender? Literally. We have to provide numbers, all of us who are on the business side, of how many people are you treating based on race or gender, and how that fits in. And a winning mark is if you know 50% of your patient body, what race they are and what gender they are. But now we're all being required to say that we're treating everybody equally, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, economic level. And yet, despite all the data we don't have basics. Mm-hmm. Most of it is captured at some point or another, right? But it gets lost in the of so much data. The other piece is that what AI enables us to do is really engage the patient and caregiver, right? So it's such a simple question. What gender do you identify with? AI enables us to get that information directly from the patient and have it put into the systems. So another area that is moving definitely in healthcare is, I call it health systems without walls. Right, we're going to see less and less happening in a traditional hospital system, more and more happening at home, at Starbucks, on a drive-through. Like it's going to be really, truly, truly care where the patient and caregiver want it and want to access it on their terms. And AI gives us the ability to track that and be able to provide personal care where and when it is. Am I still connected? It just flashed a bit. The other is, we know 100% that healthcare is moving towards, finally, patient-centered experience, right? And that experience is becoming essential also in how you function and how you get paid and how you keep going. The experience, and this is where AI has been so interesting in areas like entertainment and finance and other fields that have put experience first. So as we see a real push on patient experience and caregiver experience and provider experience, we're going to see way more of AI coming in order to not wait until there's a complaint, be tracking as we do in other fields. How are you doing? How can we help? How can we make this better? AI is beautiful for that. And we're also going to see a lot more in terms of better outcomes as defined by the patient. So we talk a lot about outcomes as if survivability is always the best outcome. You've lived longer, and therefore we've won, and it's a better outcome. That is not always the case. Many times, a patient will say, I would rather have a different quality of life. I would rather be home. I don't care about 5 more bad years. I want 1 more good year. Well, that is so subjective and personal, but with all of this different data and connectivity that AI enables us to do, we're able to support that. And we're able to change outcome definition, not to a white paper, but to what is the best outcome for you as a patient and caregiver. So I think that it's all really pretty tied well. And I'm amazed my 5 different systems managed to make it through the whole conference. This has been so good. It's so nice meeting everybody. And I know we could talk for a long time about this. So.
No, that's great. And, we actually have a question that I want to throw out to all of you that was brought forward. And I'll read the last part of it first, because it basically is asking, how we can use AI to bring back the joy of practicing medicine. And the full question is, how can AI transform clinical workflows, simplify medical documentation, enable doctors to have a meaningful interaction with their patients, and bring back the joy of practicing medicine?
I'll give one quick answer before everybody. 20% of a day in a doctor's life now is on administrative paperwork and financial. And I don't know a single person who went to medical school to practice medicine who said, I want to spend one day out of every 5 not seeing patients and working on paperwork and regulations, right? So we can get back that day and make that day for patients and providers. And then there'll be a lot more joy. And we can also help you not have to worry as a provider about whether or not you're going to get paid to show up at work. And let's be honest, like, people are human. The other is that we can take a lot of the lift of the other areas that you don't want to be doing so that you can do what only you can do as a provider, which is have that trusted relationship between a provider and patient. AI does the dirty work so that you can do the important work.
Absolutely. And I think it also strengthens our bench of talent, because we aren't wasting our time doing non-patient care things. And we certainly have found, in particular with COVID, a situation where, we're in high demand of care providers, and not only are they getting burned out and leaving the workforce, there are other companies that allow them to care for patients remotely. So that is actually taking them away from the bedside as well. So the more we can do, and AI is going to be a huge advantage here to keep providers at the bedside and provide that necessary care and identify those patients who actually, those exceptions that need addressed by a provider, as opposed to data that's demonstrates everything's running smoothly. That is really going to help advance us as well. Just some thoughts I had as you were all speaking. Anyone else want to weigh in on bringing back the joy to healthcare practice?
I mean, it's being on the front lines pretty constantly. I think that there's two of the biggest issues I see why it's not joyful. Is that you'll find that either the patient themselves is in a very hostile circumstance, which then kind of translates to yourself having a hostile circumstance. And then the second one is when you don't end up delivering good care to your patients. Both of those things, I think, take the joy out of your day as being a healthcare practitioner. The first one is, usually, oftentimes, when patients are super frustrated, it's not because they're actually so sick. It's because they're frustrated while receiving treatment. They're either waiting for a long time, or they're asking the same things, or they keep getting pushed around from person to person, or there's some payer-related issue, some coverage issue, waiting for an authorization, overcapacity, whatever it is. That experience of just getting to the point where care is being provided or diagnosis is being rendered is as terrible, and thus once they finally get to the end practitioner, they're already super upset and has nothing to do with that practitioner. So I think that AI has a unique way to do that, because it can much more accurately give you your diagnosis and treatment protocols without having a human involved, which means you can do so very, very, very quickly, as opposed to queuing in the ER. And that'll be a big difference. There's studies by large, very prestigious hospital systems that show that 70 to 80% of ER admissions are unnecessary. They shouldn't have gone to the emergency room. So if you have the ability to do those diagnoses before you go admitted to the ER, so kind of an ER diversion technique, you're going to very much increase what that patient's experience is, which means you're going to increase the provider's experience. And I think there's a lot more joy in it, because you're not unnecessarily pushing people around. And then on actually delivering the wrong care, when you have you have your bed ratios, your provider to bed ratios, when those become out of band, then all of a sudden you're stretched too thin and you make incorrect decisions because you don't have time to actually synthesize the data well enough. If you had the ability to have AI, you're talking about some of the systems that the GE has as well, the ability to take all of the, you're just consuming the H&P in real time. You're consuming the diagnostics in real time, and you can do interventions as a result of quantifying that data, you'll be able to allow for you to do more because you're responding more to a suggestion that's coming from the system as opposed to always having to make that clinical decision yourself. So I think those two key components, if you're able to improve the patient experience when they get to the provider and then able to make a better decision for a higher clinical outcome, I think it's a far, far more joyful medical experience.
That is so right. That is such a great answer. Would anyone else like to weigh in on that or any other thoughts you want to share?
I'll chime in, just to kind of piggyback on what Anthony, talked about, right? So the medical record, right? Building the report, looking at the workflow, going through every single transaction on a workflow. If you ask radiologists, majority of their time is just spent, clicking in the workflow and then reading the actual image and then identifying the actual diagnose and then building that structure report that's consumable for the physician. So the part of the AI that we are applying is in our PACS, which is the picture archiving system, where you have all these images that are coming from different, modality, whether it's an MR, CT, X-ray, where there are two areas. One is the prioritization of the workflow, which is I gave the example earlier on. If you know the diagnose, you can prioritize that particular image and radiologists would work on that first. So that's one. Second, we are also embedding AI and building a smart reporting. So that takes away a lot of time these radiologists spend in building that structured reporting where they have to manually feed the data, and it automatically brings, the historical context. To Gail's point, the premises here and the assumption here is the record, the health record of a patient is accurate, but it has automated that back end manual processes for the radiologist, so then they can focus on one, that prioritized list, which has also been applied AI for a specific segmentation of any of the areas in terms of what they are diagnosing for. And it also, allows them to just focus on the reading, and then it enables that smart reporting coming out of the workflow. So that's one area where, in true sense, I'm sure radiologists would rather focus more on just, diagnosing than filling out the paperwork to then provide that report, which is very much, most of the time is very structured. And it enables them to enjoy what they really like to do, right? That's one area that we have leveraged AI, Barbara.
I'll add to that too, just in terms of that sense of joy. Yes, definitely from a provider perspective, but also bringing this all the way back to the patient, right? Making sure that the patient can get quick care, that's high quality care. It's not even so much that, from a health equity perspective, we are all entitled to care, but we should make the argument that we are all entitled to that same level of care. Gail made the statement of not only fixing the sidewalk, but fixing it for everyone. And this is where I think technology and AI-enabled technology is going to bring this high level of care to everyone, and it should. And furthermore, it should be collecting excellent data that we can easily transmit to the best specialists around the world. So no matter where you live, urban environment, rural environment, all of this data can be collected properly, shared with the best experts, and then that information can be returned in a meaningful way to the patient. So I think that's where that other part of joy needs to come in, that we show that respect to the patients and get them the best care.
Really great points. I think as someone who's been a provider, I can tell you that it has always amazed me that we can be so technologically savvy, yet we have to ask a patient 10 times the same information. And we still don't have that information in front of us, or the end of a good shift is I was able to navigate all the various barriers within the system and was maze bright enough to do it to deliver care, it's almost like going through an obstacle course because of the data challenges that you have, as opposed to really effectively using your time. This is just such a game changer for all of us as we're moving forward. And, I guess I would just ask Gail if you have any final thoughts on that, about the intersection of maybe AI and workforce. I know you've thought a lot about that issue.
It's what I find really interesting about this whole listening to everybody. What an amazing panel. Thank you so much, everybody. Is that each person on this panel is waking up every morning and thinking about one particular problem and solving it in healthcare. And this is what healthcare has been. And to a negative from the standpoint of a super, super siloed, very complex system. And if you can imagine what AI has the power to do, what has happened during this, while we've all been talking, right, is through the entire continuum of care and the entire continuum of the business, both of which have to happen at the same time, all of these different solutions can now be connected for a single experience for the patient, the caregiver, the provider, and all of the different stakeholders. That is incredibly powerful. That's the game changer, right? Because when a patient, when a doctor, when a nurse, when somebody who has to approve payment, when somebody has to make sure that the temperature is working right in the building. I mean, let's be honest, if the power is not working, there are so many complex pieces. When that becomes connected in one string, that's the game changer. We're going to then suddenly come to expect, finally, a really positive experience as being part of healthcare. And I'm really, really excited. And I'm like so excited to hear what everybody's doing. Like my mind's running so much. Thank you so much. Nitin, you there to wrap us up from our host?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we're at about time. This was a fascinating discussion. We could talk for hours. Unfortunately, we're out of that time. So, Nitin, I wanted to hand it back over to you to just close us out of our session.
Sure, Barbara. Sure. Thank you. And thank you, Dharti. Thank you, Richard, Gail, Anthony, Rory, Mark. I think it was a fabulous discussion which we had for 1.5 hours. And thanks for all of you for taking time and taking this discussion at such a length. I think we discussed all the parameters of how technology is impacting healthcare. And great discussion, guys. Thank you, all of you. So just to wrap up, we would like to thank our technology partner Digit7 and all our community partners, speakers, and all the attendees who came together for enriching knowledge to this forum. It was a really interesting discussion which we witnessed today. Request all of you to log into our website and like the social media channels. We'll be sharing lots of knowledge sharing topics, details of all our forthcoming events, and many much more things which will help you register and attend the quality events. Just for your information, today's event was broadcasted live in the YouTube and the Facebook page of our company. So it will be there anytime. So you can just like it and you can go and see the recording anytime as per your will. There are lots more in store for subsequent months as well, with focus on banking, financial, retail, e-commerce, factories, transportation, aviation, and many more industries which we are focusing for this particular year. So request all of you to keep connected with us. Enjoy the learning. Have a lovely day ahead, all of you. Thanks a lot for taking your time. Thanks, all the panel members.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.